Sviatoslav, a spy ring of local officials reporting classified information to Russia was uncovered in Bulgaria 2 weeks ago. You wrote for Veridica about this rare case of an inside job and, according to General Prosecutor Geshev, unprecedented. Is this the largest espionage network in Bulgaria since 1944, as Geshev said?
Well, we should put always the statements by Ivan Geshev and the prosecution in the right context. Because basically when he came in power in the end of 2019, he was the sole nominee for the post, which created protests by lawyers, human rights activists. There was actually quite big protests in Sofia. And for the last 2 years, Geshev has quite a controversial reputation. He's often seen as a shield for every activity by the government and also very hostile towards opposition media. What's very interesting that since the beginning of his term, for example, he distanced the prosecution from the case of Emilian Gebrev, who was allegedly poisoned with Novichok for his alleged business affairs in Ukraine. So there was actually a few controversial statements which gives him the aura of a very actually conservative kind of personality. So it's very interesting that those who express conservative sentiments and in a way maybe even a little sympathy for Russia are now actually uncovering a Russian spy ring right before the elections, where the main ruling coalition is facing a very, very big opposition. So I think that in many ways the timing of these uncoverings is, it's not a coincidence. But yes, there wasn't before a discovery of that magnitude. In the last 2-3 years, Bulgaria made a bit of a habit of expelling people on being alleged spies. I think that right now there are like 8 exposed diplomats in the last 2 years. Yes, what's very individual about this case is, yes, it's happening right before an election. It's an inside job. It concerns people who are in the Ministry of Defense, and it concerns mainly 6 people who were detained between March 18 and March 19.
Какво сега да решаваме? Какво да пишем? Какво да...
Искаш периодично?
Не, Ишко пак ни си остава всеки месец. Първата неделя.
Да.
След 20.
След 20.
Пред пчелата там някъде в този район.
Да.
Ама в колко часа? За понеделник сме на смени. Искам освен 9 часа.
Айде 9.
9, добре, да се пиши за някъде, защото може 2 месеца да не минат и после да не кажеш дали беше 8, дали беше 9, дали беше 7.
Значи отиваме на януари, така ли? Защото сега сме декември. Аз ще бъда във Варна до празници.
Добре. Да. Еми от януари, да.
Значи първата неделя след 20 януари.
След 20,
за рождения ден да си звънеш?
Няма ми звъниш. Ако е 20 неделя, на 20 се яваш.
Добре.
Значи на 20 или след това.
Добре.
Няма да звъниш. И ми звъниш, да ти дам ръки. Да ли, нали водиш доста разговори иначе?
Да.
Защото много е важно и дали имаш, как се кажеш, дали имаш разговорите. Моя евентуално да ми звъннеш нещо, ако нещо стане, знам ли? Сега нещо друго, ако нещо стане много сериозно около теб, как да вземе да ти знаеш къде ще да знаеш?
Я кажи пак, че... На 13 етаж ли беше?
13? Бока, помниш ли го?
И Мишо го намери.
Ти Бока си идва от нас, ти изправи ли един път?
Да.
Той е 13 етажа, долу. Трябва да чакаш някой да ти отвори, защото на Илиеви мен не ми работи това
Da.
The leaders of the group are a Bulgarian couple who are maybe in their early 70s. It's Ivan Iliev, who actually graduated the investigative school in Moscow. But yes, he's actually a former chief of the military intelligence in Bulgaria. And it seems like he never really stopped that activity on the side of the Soviet Union. So he was actually giving orders to four people, at least three of them are part of the Ministry of Defense, to basically collect certain information over NATO's activities in Bulgaria, most specifically trainings in Varna.
Значи, аз друго си помислих. Някъде в някой чекмедже съм сложил, ще отгоре сложиш една бележка, подарък за Виктория. Подарък за Виктория. Все едно, че ходиш и ще правиш подарък. Да, при теб. Но без карта. Когато можеш да снимаш сега, в началото, няма да снимаш. Да видим как ще изглежда. Може да скапнеш някакви какви материали. Значи материали, които са тук нашата обстановка. Материали, които са Русия, Украина. Окей, Горни Карабах, за нещо Горни Карабах. Тоест нещо актуално. Се одобри, като решиме, ако още не е решено. Те са тия материали, след тази 4 месеца ще кажем, окей. Ако е сигурно, и ако не може да се снимаш, ще направиш. По-добре да се снимаш. Но ти ще решиш безопасност. Видят ти знае какво ще решиш. Ти си само все пак ти ще застанеш срещу хората, срещу екрана. Първо, то нали може да изкара, като снимаш да изкараш снимката, да виж дали си ще, дали не е замазана. Можеш да не кажеш, защото все пак всичко, което касае близки изток, както е Горни Карабах, което много далеко. Украина също, Беларус, Русия. Да речем 8% поляци, които са в основата на процеса. Така, между другото, ще кажеш. И ако има нещо, което да е секретно, да не бъде неконтролирано, все пак може да видят, че има квалифицирано.
So you talk about 8 Russian diplomatic officers. The Russian embassy in Sofia were declared persona non grata by authorities, or maybe 10.
I think it's 8, with 2 being expelled just recently after
in the last 3 years.
Yes.
Which is a big number.
Yes, but what's interesting is that these expulsions are always announced in like Friday afternoon, or they're usually followed by expulsions of Bulgarian diplomats in Moscow, which it's very interesting that the reaction from Russia so far over this affair is kind of muted. Like they just express disappointment that this is happening, and there's still no Bulgarian diplomats expelled from Moscow. So,
but not this time. I mean, this time there is not an official reaction so far.
Yes, exactly.
What could be the reason for that?
I don't know, but it's too early to tell maybe, but I guess that especially a lot of people who are kind of concerned with the law aspects.
In the last 3 years, the Bulgarian counterintelligence service seems to have started a real hunt for Russian spies and agents. What do you think it's behind this action in the last 3 years?
Well, all of these news are reported in a very individual way. Like even the most recent two expulsions of the diplomats, the official information actually never stated these are related to the red spies. So they happen without being put in a context. So in a way, there isn't an official state version why there is such a process, so we can interpret it furtherly. So yes, as many affairs in Bulgaria, there is a bit of an invincible wall between the institutions and the media. A lot of institutions simply won't talk to media. So it's very hard to actually search for information besides the official versions in a way. So yes, it's hard to have some kind of a narrative about it. If we have to take the whole context around Bulgarian politics and around the Russian influence of the Bulgarian politics, because, for example, the Bulgarian Socialist Party is still very tied to pro-Russia sentiments. Our far right is very, very openly pro-Russia. So we do have a lot of percentage of our government being Russia-friendly.
Is the name of the Russian officer who coordinated the network known?
No. They're like different. The names have not been publicly announced by the prosecution, although there are different sources in different media which state the name. But it seems like mostly it was coordinated by the local guy, Ivan Iliev, who was first he was named just as the resident by the prosecution in the prosecution's presentation. So no, there isn't actually much information about who was above the rest.
What do you think? Which is the most active intelligence service in Bulgaria? Is the SVR, Foreign Intelligence Service, or GRU, the main directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Force?
Well, yes, that's actually the institution that the so-called president has graduated along with his wife, which has a double Bulgarian.
The GRU institution. Yeah.
And this was actually, I think, the institution that most agents from the former state security have graduated. I don't know. It's hard for me to say which has a certain activity or an influence. But I think that the whole affair is also has a second wave of interpretations. It's that still a lot of people from the former communist era state security are still an active part from those affairs, as well as being members of the parliament and also running in the elections on April 4. So there is a class of politicians and people connected to them which are trained in those times, and it often seems like those times never really stopped for them in a way.
You mentioned in your article, I think, 60 guys who are still in politics and are related to the former communist.
87 actually.
Yeah.
A lot of 87.
It's a big number.
Yes, quite a big number. It's as everything, there is yet another layer. Like probably not everyone who has a file was actually a hardcore informant or a hardcore agent, but yeah, it's a stain. And yes, I mean, there is an obvious link between the Bulgarian state security, the forming of the 90s mafia, this mafia getting legalized slowly by the end of the 90s and the early 90s, and these people still being in politics.
So 6 high-ranking officials from the armed force were arrested. 1 was released.
It's 6 people. 4 are working in institutions. The 2 are the leader of the group, Ivan Iliev, and his wife.
His wife. And yes. How big is the damage? Do we know?
No, we don't really have a grasp of what they actually collected, but it most likely were like maybe basic information about Bulgaria's military capabilities, and what were NATO's activities in Bulgaria. More about, I think it's more about purely kind of logistics and the way certain conflict zones that are of interest of Russia are discussed in the Bulgarian media sphere.
Why do you think these people choose to spy and betray their country? I mean, what are their profile? Are they pro-Russian, nationalists, communist, nostalgic? And what were the reasons behind their action? I mean, their professional frustrations, financial needs, or just ideology?
It's probably more about financial needs. There was a bit of information that they have received $3,000 each for their services. And what's very interesting from the recordings is that there isn't much, like, the informants don't really talk that much about it, to the extent that one wonders whether they actually knew they're part of a network. For example, it's mostly the so-called the resident stalking. It's like, you have to do a photo of this, you have to copy of that, and the other guy is usually like, okay, yes, that's pretty much it. Like, they don't, on these recordings, they don't really show any kind of a character or some kind of maybe ideological commitment. So it's most likely just, just a way for maybe financial gratification. But I won't be surprised if, those people also have some kind of pro-Russian sentiments. But it's, on these recordings, people talk in a very about relaxed and just technical matter, like, you do this, okay, I'll do that. So there isn't really any kind of emotion around it.
Все пак берат 5000 лева всеки месец или 3000 лева всеки месец. 3000 лева все пак някаква сумичка. По-нататък беше специален апарат, който по-основно сферен, който се криптира или да се криптира с снимането на карта и се криптира и това вече ако не се срещаме там, по-нататък ще ви може и телефоните да не се обърнат. Направо казваме, да е да подрежда, кога си е какъв резервен също.
So you talk about the Socialist Party, who is close to Russia, and also the far-right movement. Here in Romania, Bulgaria is known as a state close to Russia, which is why the reaction of the Bulgarian authorities it's more surprising. Do you think it's a false perception now in Romania, at least?
Oh, I think that Russian interests and Russian ties between politics and oligarchy and are pretty much they're pretty much strong as ever. For example, there is such a wave of fake news websites in Bulgarian and in Russian, or translated between those languages, which is, for example, all about anti-vax rhetoric, all about anti-Western rhetoric, everything about anti-LGBT. This whole narrative is pretty much very obviously linked to Russia. It's so obvious that sometimes, you know, when you visit certain pages, it recommends you Russian pages on Facebook. Even the algorithm knows it. So in a way, it's, I think that there's still a lot of, I don't think that Bulgaria is any freer from its ties to Russia than let's say several years before, or before these explosions began. I think in many ways it's a sort of a publicity stunt to pretend this is not the situation, because Bulgaria, being part of the European Union, and kind of wanting to associate itself as a Western ally at all costs, because the government, especially Prime Minister Boiko Borisov, has a very different image in Bulgaria and when he goes on a meeting in Brussels, for example. We have the image of being absolutely obliging to the EU, while in local media you see a very, very different narrative. So yes, Bulgaria, I think, is still very, very tied to those sentiments.
There are a lot of Russian spies who were exposed in Europe. Last week, we have the Italian case. So we had in Great Britain, in Germany, in Czech Republic, in Bulgaria, a lot of them. So do you think it's a lack of professional capabilities of the Russian spies, or what is happening? I mean, the guys from Bellingcat in their kitchen with a laptop exposed a network.
Yes, yeah. Well, yes, I don't think they're actually hiding. They're hiding at plain sight, it seems. For example, yes, it's really interesting that, as I mentioned in these recordings, people are just talking about collecting classified information in the most relaxed way possible in a restaurant. So yes, indeed, there isn't. Yes, maybe they're just bad at it. I don't know. Maybe we never know about the good professional guys in the situation.
And there is any possibility to be more member of this network at large?
Well, I guess so. I guess that the prosecution kind of made it clear that this is, part of an even larger network. So yes, maybe this is a process that's going to continue, but maybe in the same way it was in the last 2 years, just bit by bit, when every time Bulgaria is needed to make a statement that, yes, we're pro-West, they'll make such a move. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.